All right, buckle up. We're about to take a deep dive into the world of, well, Indiana Jones, our favorite archaeologist. You've sent us a ton of information on this legendary franchise. Like, seriously, it's a lot.
From what I've seen, we're going to uncover some amazing stuff, even for the most hardcore fans out there.
So let's rewind all the way back. The year is 1973. George Lucas, the mastermind behind Star Wars, he gets this idea, a whip-wielding adventurer. Where did that even come from?
Think of it this way. It's a classic story of inspiration striking when you least expect it. Picture this. Young George Lucas, totally captivated by those old adventure serials from the 30s and 40s.
Oh man, those cliffhanger endings, they just don't make them like that anymore.
Right. Lucas wanted to capture that feeling, that thrilling adventure, but give it a fresh, modern spin. So what does he do? He comes up with this character, Indiana Smith. A little rough around the edges. An archaeologist who'd rather be dodging booby traps than, greeting papers.
Okay, Indiana Smith. I mean, it's not bad, but how did we get from Smith to the Jones we know and love?
Fast forward a few years. We're talking Star Wars era now. Lucas is working on the film, and he takes a trip to Maui with his buddy, Steven Spielberg.
Now, Spielberg at this point, this is before he became, well, Spielberg.
Right.
Yeah.
Although he was already making waves in Hollywood. Anyway, Spielberg is kind of itching to try something different. He's just had this huge success with Close Encounters. He tells Lucas, I think I want to direct a James Bond film.
Okay, so this is where things get interesting.
And Lucas, never one to be outdone, says, hold on, I got something better. He pulls out this Indiana Smith idea. And Spielberg, immediately hooked. He loves the adventure, the whole concept, but he thinks Smith is a little too plain.
A tad on the generic side, maybe.
Yeah. So here's where the story gets good. Lucas has this dog, a big, beautiful Alaskan Malamute. And guess what its name was? Indiana. Spielberg liked it Indiana, but he thought it needed something stronger, something with a little more punch. He suggests Jones. Simple, memorable.
And the rest, as they say, is history. Or should I say cinematic history. But we're missing a pretty crucial piece of the puzzle here. The man himself, Harrison Ford.
It's funny, isn't it? How you can't imagine anyone else playing Indiana Jones now. But believe it or not, Harrison Ford. Not the first choice.
Wait, seriously? Who else were they considering?
Tom Selleck.
No way! Magnum P.I. is Indiana Jones. Wow, what happened?
Scheduling conflicts. It happens all the time in Hollywood. Selleck was under contract with Magnum, couldn't get out of it. And that's when Spielberg really had to fight for Ford. Lucas wasn't totally sold at first.
I guess even the greats need a little convincing sometimes. Thank goodness Spielberg saw that spark in Ford, though. Talk about a game changer. Okay, let's talk Raiders of the Lost Ark. Specifically, that artifact everyone's after. The Ark of the Covenant. Is that a real thing or just movie magic?
Ah, the Ark is one of those things that blurs the lines between history, myth, and legend. It's a real artifact mentioned in religious texts, said to have housed the Ten Commandments. But even today, people debate its whereabouts, if it even exists at all.
Okay, so this isn't just some buried treasure. This is serious, religious, and historical gold.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so powerful on screen. Lucas and Spielberg, genius move choosing the Ark. It instantly raises the stakes. This isn't just Indy finding some lost artifact. It's about recovering something incredibly powerful that could rewrite history as we know it.
We're talking about the ultimate treasure hunt with a side of biblical epic. Speaking of epic, there's that scene in Raiders, you know the one. Indy comes face to face with this swordsman. This guy is showing off all these fancy moves, and Indy, well, he just shoots him. Hilarious. Was that always part of the plan?
That, my friend, is what we call movie magic happening right before your eyes. Harrison Ford, he was actually really sick that day, food poisoning or something. He wasn't up for a big choreographed fight scene.
I can relate. So what happened?
He turns to Spielberg and says, hey, why don't I just shoot the guy?
Talk about cutting to the chase.
Spielberg loved it. It was perfect for Indy, resourceful, little impatient, always willing to take the most direct route to victory. And that scene became an instant classic.
It's amazing how sometimes the best things happen when you least expect it. Raiders, of course, becomes this massive hit. Sequels, merchandise, the whole shebang. So what happened next? Did they jump right into another adventure?
This is where things take a bit of a turn. Instead of just going straight into a sequel, Lucas and Spielberg, they decided to take us back in time a little.
We're going prequel mode, Temple of Doom, set a whole year before Raiders. But why the time jump back instead of forward?
Well, partly it was a strategic move. Lucas didn't want to get stuck rehashing the whole Nazi thing from Raiders. Plus, there's something kind of mysterious about Indy's past. Like, how did he become this awesome adventurer?
There's a reason everyone loves a good origin story.
Exactly. And Temple of Doom, well, it delivers on that. We see a younger Indy, a little rougher around the edges maybe. We see him navigating that whole shady underbelly of Shanghai before he gets tangled up in a plot involving a lost city, a creepy cult, and those Sankara stones.
Oh man, those bugs. After that banquet scene, I still can't look at a dinner roll the same.
Definitely not a movie for the easily grossed out.
Yeah.
But beneath all the creepy crawlies in action, Temple of Doom really makes you think. It touches on colonialism, cultural clashes, even that whole good versus evil thing when the lines get a bit blurry.
Yeah, Temple of Doom definitely has a darker vibe than Raiders. And from what I've read, it wasn't a hit with everyone.
You're right. It divided people. Some people, they loved the darker tone, the exotic locations, the action. But others, they felt like it lost some of that lighthearted fun energy from Raiders.
It's funny how a film can still spark debate all these years later. So how did Lucas and Spielberg react to all the Temple of Doom talk?
They listened. Well, at least a little. For the third movie, The Last Crusade, they decided to go back to what worked in Raiders. Nazis, religious artifacts, humor. And they added a new layer, that whole father-son dynamic.
Oh, yeah. Sean Connery as Indy's dad. Brilliant casting.
Genius. I mean, Spielberg finally got to work with his childhood hero, and the chemistry between them is just electric. But there's this other layer to it, too. Remember how Spielberg originally wanted to direct a James Bond film?
Wait a minute. You're saying casting Connery was Spielberg's way of bringing some of that Bond magic into Indiana Jones?
Exactly. It's subtle, but it works so well. The Last Crusade, it's like a love letter to those classic adventure films, full of heart, humor, and some truly unforgettable action sequences.
It's interesting, though, even with The Last Crusade being a huge success, the series kind of took a detour into television. What was the thinking there with the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
Oh, man. Ambitious project.
Yeah.
The idea was to show Indy at different points in his life, filling in those gaps between his childhood and his more famous adventures.
Kind of like Forrest Gump vibes.
Yeah.
With Indy running into all these historical figures.
You got it. They even brought in real historical figures. Yeah. Winston Churchill, Teddy Roosevelt, they really went for it with the historical accuracy.
Did it work? Did the show capture that same magic as the films?
That's a tough one. It had its moments, but it never quite hit that sweet spot between history, adventure, and humor the way the films did.
What went wrong?
Maybe they tried to do too much at once. Family show, educational, action, adventure. It's hard to be everything to everyone.
A tough balancing act, for sure. Sounds like they might have lost some of that classic indie feel.
Yeah, maybe. And while it had its fans, it never really reached that same level of popularity as those films. But hey, at least we got to see Indy in a whole new light, right?
And it paved the way for the franchise to return to the big screen after almost 20 years. Which brings us to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And that movie, well, it definitely got people talking. Yeah,
What?
Crystal Skull. It really stirred the pot, didn't it? I mean, beyond the whole, CGI gopher thing.
Some things are definitely better left to the magic of practical effects, but, on a deeper level, I think Crystal Skull rubbed some people the wrong way because it messed with the formula. This was the first Indiana Jones movie set during the Cold War, and it brought in this whole sci-fi element that we hadn't really seen before.
Yeah, we went from ancient curses to, alien artifacts. That's a big leap.
It was a risk, and it totally divided the fan base. Some people, they love seeing Indy take on something new and different, but others felt like it just didn't feel like Indiana Jones anymore. And then there was the CGI.
Yeah, for fans who grew up with those classic practical effects, it must have been a bit of a shock. Remember the melting faces in Raiders? I mean, terrifying, but also kind of amazing how they did that with just makeup and creativity.
Exactly. There's a certain something about those old school special effects that CGI just can't always replicate. But Crystal Skull wasn't all aliens and special effects. It also had this other layer to it about Indy getting older, facing his own mortality.
And passing the torch, right? Enter Shia LaBeouf as Mutt Williams' Indy's son, which brings its own whole other can of worms.
The Shia LaBeouf thing, it speaks to this bigger issue in Hollywood. How do you take a beloved character and pass the baton to a new generation? It's a tough balance trying to please those diehard fans while also bringing in new blood.
You can't please everyone, right? So bottom line, what's the verdict on Crystal Skull? Is it a good Indiana Jones movie or a swing and a miss?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Honestly, I think people will still be debating Crystal Skull years from now. It has its issues, sure, but it's also got moments of greatness, and it definitely took some risks, which is something you got to respect.
And then we get Dial of Destiny, which felt like a real goodbye.
Yeah. Bittersweet, isn't it, Dial of Destiny? It's definitely a more thoughtful, melancholy film than the others. Almost like Spielberg and Ford wanted to really take a look at Indy's life. The toll that all his adventures must have taken.
You can feel that sadness throughout the whole film, even during the action sequences.
Absolutely. It's intentional, though. It reflects the themes of the movie aging, regret, time passing. And it kind of reminds you that some legends, well, they can't be replaced.
Which leads to the big question. What's next for Indiana Jones? Can the franchise even exist without Harrison Ford?
There's been talk, spin-offs, TV shows, maybe even a full-blown reboot with someone new under the fedora. But right now, it's all just speculation.
So we're left with an incredible legacy, 4 decades, 5 films, a TV series, and countless memories. From those dusty archives to booby-trapped temples, Indy's taken us on one wild ride.
What's amazing is how he's endured, how he's become this icon. He represents something timeless, that thirst for adventure, a love of history, that willingness to face danger with a smirk and a whip.
And let's not forget the music, John Williams. Those scores are iconic.
Absolutely. It's that perfect storm of elements: action, humor, heart, and a good dose of escapism. That's what makes Indiana Jones so special.
He reminds us that it's okay to embrace the unknown, to seek out adventure even if it means running into a few snakes along the way.
And hey, maybe to believe in a little bit of magic too, right?
Well, folks, this has been quite the deep dive. We've unearthed some fascinating insights into the making of these films, the creative choices, the controversies, and the impact of a character that continues to capture our imaginations. If you could go on an adventure with Indy, where would you go and what artifact would you seek? Let us know.